Welcome to Just Stories. We hope you enjoy the story. The Fractured Nation, a historical account of the Spanish Civil War, by Just Stories. Chapter 1, Prelude towards the tensions and divisions that led to the conflict. The Spanish Civil War was a complex and multifaceted conflict that erupted in 1936 and lasted until 1939. In order to understand the causes and dynamics of this conflict, it is important to examine the prelude towards the political, social, and economic factors that contributed to the outbreak of hostilities. One of the primary drivers of the conflict was the political polarization of Spanish society. In the early 20th century, Spain was a country undergoing significant change. The monarchy had been overthrown in 1931 and a republic was established in its place. However, the new government was beset by a number of challenges, including economic instability, regional tensions, and a series of labor strikes and social protests. As a result of these challenges, Spanish society became increasingly divided along political lines. On one side were the Republicans, who were generally progressive and supported democratic reforms, secularism, and social justice. On the other side were the Nationalists, who were conservative and favored traditional values, Catholicism, and strong centralized government. Within these broad political camps, there were a number of factions with their own agendas and ideologies. On the Republican side, for example, there were the Socialists, who advocated for workers' rights and redistribution of wealth, and the Anarchists, who believed in the abolition of all forms of government and the establishment of a classless society. On the nationalist side, there were the Phalangists, who were Spanish fascists inspired by Mussolini's Italy, and the Carlists, who were monarchists seeking to restore the old order. These various factions were often in conflict with one another, and their ideological differences were compounded by regional and cultural divisions. Spain is a country with a long history of regionalism, and this was especially true in the early 20th century. Catalonia, for example, had a strong separatist movement, while the Basque Country was fiercely protective of its distinct culture and language. In addition to political and regional tensions, there were also economic factors that contributed to the prelude to war. Spain was a country with a largely agrarian economy, and the vast majority of the population was rural and poor. Many of these rural workers were subject to exploitation and abuse by landowners and industrialists, and this led to widespread labor unrest and strikes. The Spanish Civil War can also be seen as part of a larger global trend towards ideological conflict and polarization. In the 1930s, fascism and communism were on the rise throughout Europe, and many countries were grappling with questions about how to balance competing political and economic ideologies. Ultimately, the prelude to war was characterized by a range of tensions and divisions that were deeply ingrained in Spanish society. The country was beset by political polarization, economic instability, and regional separatism, and these factors all contributed to the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War in 1936. In the following chapters, we will explore the various actors and factors that shaped the course of this conflict, and examine its lasting impact on Spanish society and the wider world. Chapter 2, The Republican Struggles Fighting for Democracy and Freedom. The Republican forces that fought against the insurgent nationalists during the Spanish Civil War were a diverse and committed group of men and women who were united in their determination to defend democracy and freedom in Spain. In this chapter, we will explore the history and character of the Republican side of the conflict, and examine the challenges and triumphs that they experienced during the course of the war. The Republican forces were made up of a range of political and social groups, including socialists, communists, anarchists, and liberals. They were united by a common belief in the need for democratic reforms, workers' rights, and social justice, and were dedicated to fighting against the fascist and authoritarian forces that sought to destroy these values. One of the key strengths of the Republican side was its commitment to inclusivity and diversity. Women played an important role in the conflict, both as fighters and as activists working to promote gender equality and women's rights. The International Brigades, a group of volunteers from around the world who came to Spain to fight for the Republican cause, were another example of the Republican commitment to diversity and internationalism. Despite these strengths, however, the Republican forces faced a number of challenges during the course of the war. One of the biggest challenges was the lack of effective military leadership. The Republican Army was poorly trained and equipped, and was often hampered by infighting and political disagreements. This made it difficult for them to mount effective offensives against the better trained and better equipped nationalist forces. Another challenge was the impact of international politics on the conflict. The nationalist forces received support from fascist regimes in Italy and Germany, who provided troops, weapons, and other forms of aid. The Republican forces, by contrast, received limited support from the Western democracies, who were wary of getting involved in what they saw as a local conflict. Despite these challenges, the Republican forces were able to mount a number of successful offensives during the course of the war. One of the most notable of these was the Battle of Madrid, which took place in late 1936 and early 1937. In this battle, Republican forces were able to successfully defend the city from a nationalist assault, despite being outnumbered and outgunned. The Republican forces were also able to achieve a number of important social and political gains during the war. These included the establishment of workers' collectives and other forms of socialist organization, the promotion of gender equality and women's rights, and the establishment of a more secular and progressive society. In the end, however, the Republican forces were unable to overcome the military and political advantages held by the nationalists. The fall of Barcelona in early 1939 marked the end of the Republican struggle and paved the way for the establishment of the fascist regime that would dominate Spain for the next several decades. Despite their ultimate defeat, the Republican forces represented an important and inspiring moment in the history of Spain and the world. Their commitment to democracy, freedom, and social justice continues to serve as a model for activists and revolutionaries around the globe. Chapter 3: Nationalist Ascendance, Franco's Rise to Power. The nationalist forces, led by General Francisco Franco, ultimately emerged victorious in the Spanish Civil War. In this chapter, we will explore the history and character of the nationalist side of the conflict and examine the factors that contributed to their ultimate triumph. The nationalist forces were primarily composed of conservative, traditionalist elements of Spanish society, including the military, the Catholic Church, and wealthy landowners and industrialists. They were united by a common desire to defend the old order and preserve traditional Spanish values and culture. Franco emerged as the leader of the nationalist forces in 1936 and quickly established himself as a charismatic and effective military leader. He was able to rally his forces around the idea of restoring order and stability to Spain, and was able to take advantage of the weaknesses and divisions of the Republican forces. One of the key strengths of the nationalist forces was their military discipline and organization. The nationalist army was well-trained and well-equipped, and was able to mount effective offensives against the Republican forces. The nationalists also received support from fascist regimes in Italy and Germany, who provided troops, weapons, and other forms of aid. Another strength of the nationalist forces was their support from the Catholic Church. The Church played an important role in shaping Spanish culture and society, and was seen as a powerful ally by many nationalists. Franco was able to use this support to bolster his own legitimacy and strengthen his hold on power. Despite these strengths, however, the nationalist forces faced a number of challenges during the course of the war. One of the biggest challenges was the lack of popular support for their cause. Many Spaniards saw the nationalist forces as representing an old, oppressive order that was out of touch with the needs and aspirations of the people. Another challenge was the difficulty of governing a divided and polarized country in the aftermath of the conflict. The nationalist regime was marked by repression, censorship, and brutality, as Franco sought to consolidate his hold on power and stamp out any opposition. Despite these challenges, however, the nationalist forces were ultimately able to emerge victorious in the conflict. The fall of Barcelona in early 1939 marked the end of the Republican struggle and paved the way for Franco's establishment of a fascist regime that would dominate Spain for the next several decades. In the end, the nationalist victory represented a triumph of authoritarianism and repression over democracy and freedom. Franco's regime was marked by political repression, censorship, and human rights abuses, and was characterized by a deep hostility towards any form of dissent or opposition. Despite the horrors of the Franco regime, however, the nationalist ascendance represented an important moment in the history of Spain and the world. It demonstrated the power of authoritarianism and the dangers of political polarization, and served as a stark reminder of the importance of defending democratic values and institutions. Chapter 4: The Impact of the War on Spanish Society. The Spanish Civil War had a profound and lasting impact on Spanish society, both during and after the conflict. In this chapter, we will explore the social, economic, and cultural impacts of the war, and examine the ways in which it shaped the trajectory of Spanish history in the decades to come. One of the most immediate and visible impacts of the war was the widespread destruction and displacement that it caused. Large parts of Spain were left in ruins as a result of the fighting, and many people were forced to flee their homes and communities in search of safety. The refugee crisis that resulted from the conflict was one of the largest and most devastating in European history, and had a profound impact on the social fabric of Spanish society. The war also had a significant impact on the economy of Spain. The conflict disrupted the country's already fragile economic system, leading to widespread poverty, unemployment, and social upheaval. The war also led to the destruction of many of Spain's cultural and historical treasures, further compounding the economic damage caused by the conflict. In addition to these tangible impacts, the Spanish Civil War also had a significant impact on the cultural and intellectual life of Spain. The conflict gave rise to a number of important artistic and literary movements, including the Generation of 36, a group of writers and poets who sought to capture the experience of the war and its impact on Spanish society. The war also had a significant impact on Spanish politics and society. The establishment of Franco's fascist regime marked the beginning of a period of political repression and authoritarianism that would last for decades. Many Spaniards who had fought for the Republican cause were persecuted and imprisoned, while others were forced into exile. Despite these negative impacts, however, the Spanish Civil War also had a number of positive and lasting legacies. The conflict served as a powerful reminder of the importance of defending democracy and freedom, and inspired generations of activists and revolutionaries around the world. The war also led to important social and cultural gains, including the promotion of gender equality and women's rights, and the establishment of a more progressive and inclusive society. In the end, the impact of the Spanish Civil War on Spanish society was both profound and complex. The conflict had a range of social, economic, and cultural impacts that continue to be felt to this day, and its legacy serves as a reminder of the enduring importance of defending democratic values and institutions. Chapter 5: The Legacy of the Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War was a complex and multifaceted conflict that had a profound and lasting impact on Spanish society and the wider world. In this final chapter, we will examine the legacy of the conflict and explore the ways in which it continues to shape the cultural, political, and social landscape of Spain and beyond. One of the most enduring legacies of the Spanish Civil War is its impact on Spanish politics and society. The establishment of Franco's fascist regime marked the beginning of a period of political repression and authoritarianism that would last for decades. Many Spaniards who had fought for the Republican cause were persecuted and imprisoned, while others were forced into exile. This legacy of repression and political division continues to shape Spanish politics and society to this day. The conflict also had a significant impact on the cultural and intellectual life of Spain. The war gave rise to a number of important artistic and literary movements, including the Generation of 36 and the cinema of Luis Buñuel. These movements helped to shape the cultural identity of Spain in the decades following the conflict, and continue to influence Spanish culture today. The war also had a lasting impact on the international political landscape. The Spanish Civil War was seen as a precursor to World War II, and many of the tactics and strategies employed by the nationalists and Republicans during the conflict would be used by fascist and anti-fascist forces in the years that followed. The war also served as a powerful reminder of the dangers of political polarization and the importance of defending democracy and freedom. In recent years, there has been a renewed interest in the legacy of the Spanish Civil War, both in Spain and around the world. This interest has been fueled by a desire to come to terms with the past and to understand the ways in which the conflict continues to shape contemporary Spanish society. It has also been driven by a growing recognition of the importance of preserving the memory of the conflict and its victims. Today, the legacy of the Spanish Civil War is a complex and multifaceted one. It is a legacy of political repression and division, but also of artistic and cultural achievement. It is a legacy of human suffering and loss, but also of resilience and hope. Ultimately, the legacy of the Spanish Civil War serves as a reminder of the enduring importance of defending democratic values and institutions, and of the ongoing struggle to build a more just and equitable society for all. Thank you for watching our story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss out on our next video.